Well, we are really, really psyched to have Michael W. Twitty with us tonight. Michael is amazing. He is radical and he is traditional and he is expanding the definition of what it means a whole person with every word he writes, with every pot he cooks, with every step he takes. He's the real deal. He's a food historian, and he has taken that not just in sitting in libraries or even just sitting in his own kitchen, but actually stepping into the world of African forced diaspora and being brought into this land to serve in ways that are incomprehensible to most of us now, and to step back into those kitchens and to cook under those roofs and to use those pots and to learn how to build the fire and grow the herbs, like, so that it's not just intellectual history, but it is history that's been touched and tasted. And that is so quintessentially Jewish. And we're going to talk about all of that. And I'm really excited. He's also, a historian, an academic. He's got an amazing blog called Afro Culinaria that you should check out. He's been on cooking shows. He's won James Beard Awards. He's won book awards. He's amazing. You should definitely, if you haven't already, you got to read this book because it is a treasure. Can you see that? You can't see it because I'm in this weird zone with this background, but that's okay because I'm about to step into my office and invite Mr. Twitty to join me so that we can carry on in this conversation. Michael, welcome. Please come on in.
Hi, how are you? Such a pleasure. I had to kind of hold myself back a little bit because a lot of times I got to tell you I'm not seen. And you know what I mean by that. It's not like, you know, on the Pardes scale is what I mean. You got to sod level. You got to the last level with that, and I really appreciate that. 'Cause a lot of times people just go with this, and that ain't enough with any human being.
Amen. Well, listen, you bring it out and you show up. You have shown up in this life in ways that most of us, dream of. And so I wanted to start with, as I was thinking about this, I at first, in our little chat yesterday, I was thinking, well, maybe we should start with, like, Moses trying to drag these people across the desert and they're complaining about the food, right? But then I started to think about it even more and I thought, Judaism starts with food,
Mhm.
right? Like, it starts with food. The whole business is like they ate. They ate from the tree of the knowledge of wholeness and brokenness, right? They from that good and evil is terrible translations for those words. Like whole cycles and broken cycles, or hunger, even you could relate it uh,
Mhm.
to hunger. Um, so we start with eating, and that's how we learn to know ourselves. It's how we learn to know the good and the evil. And I think that is really what you've done. And I'd love to just like hear your riff on stepping into that world of these beautiful flavors that are loaded with pain. And
So
yeah,
yeah.
take it.
So right now, I am in a hotel room in Colonial Williamsburg. I decided to take off my colonial clothes because, yeah, they're not comfortable. And I'm here. I'm actually here present doing the work of putting in a garden that will officially announce to visitors, most of whom do not look like me, that this space that I'm in right now isn't where Jefferson and Washington hung out and was chilling, and George Washington slept here and all that other nonsense, and ye old colonial whatever. This was a black city. This was 52% of the population of Williamsburg in the 18th century was black. The surrounding counties were 60 to 70% black. At the time of the revolution, no family here was more than 3 generations removed from Africa. That's because Yorktown, right down, if you've ever been to this part of Virginia, Yorktown is about 15 minutes, 20 minutes drive from where I am right now. It's not very far at all. And Yorktown was where, before the revolution, probably about 1750 backwards, where about half of the population, Black population of Virginia, was brought in from Africa. In fact, you can actually go to the exact spot where the boats dropped off the enslaved Africans, and that is where a significant number of my own personal ancestors first saw America. And so I guess for me, everything that I do is this dialectic between being Jewish, being African American, being queer, being gay, and being Southern, of Southern heritage, dealing with that, being American, being an African in the diaspora, all of the different components and pieces. Some I know, some I don't know. My journeys and my seasons of life, all those things interact. So I'm going to do 2 pieces. Number 1, I'm going to answer your question. And number 2, I'm going to tell you why any of this matters. Okay. First things first, when people deal with chefs and culinary people, they forget part of the reason why they buy into their dreck is because they have a narrative to tell. Okay, they're their own maggids, right? They have their own, they do their own spin that only they can do. And I am not that person. Nah, I ain't the one who got all the culinary answers. And please, y'all, please don't ask me. Please don't ask me how to make something, because I'm gonna tell you how I make something. I put stuff in a cast iron skillet. I put the fire on. I cook it in. It's done. That's my technique. We don't, Blacks and Jews do not come from. We come from a shit Orion, right? We a little this, a little that. That's how we cook. We don't have all this sous vide and nonsense. Blacks and Jews don't have time to sous vide. That's just a fact. And we have a very unique perspective, I think. Jhos and I were joking last night, and I just said to him, okay, look, so we have this, you have the passage in Shemot where it's talking about, hey, Moshe, hey, Aharon, look, we had all these great fish and these onions and this garlic, always with garlic in us, right? Shum for days. And then it's like the cucumbers and the melons, why don't we just go back? Because the food was pretty good. The oppression, not so great, but the food was fantastic. And so it's like, okay, that's an enslaved people trying to become free, who are still kind of stuck in that comfort zone. So they forgot that the name of the place was Mitzrayim, right? The narrow place. And all they could think of it as, Long John Silver's, the best fish in town, with onions and garlic and cucumbers and melons. And they didn't want manna, which literally means, what the hell is that, in Hebrew? And so they didn't want the manna. And then, of course, the rabbis, Chazal talk tells us that the manna could be anything you wanted it to be. If you just use the law of attraction and visualization, you can make the manna whatever you wanted it to be. It could be a cheeseburger, for God's sakes. They didn't even know what a cheeseburger was, but they could be that. And they weren't willing to have the vision, But sometimes when enslaved people look backwards, it's not an issue of wanting something that you can't have at the moment. It's like, we wanted our indigenous food, our culture, the food of our cultures, from West Central Africa. And for some people, I know they don't think of it as much. And I feel sorry for them, because I've been to the continent now to 8 different countries on 7 trips. And just like going to Eretz HaKodesh, it's a very different thing than what people tell you about. Once you go there, you experience it for yourself. And so it was very easy for me to see how some of the same people who have this eternal issue with us, some of whom are running this country, are impossible without the Black man and Black woman, especially without the Black woman. Because, they tell you that there was this thing called cotton, sugarcane, tobacco, rice, indigo, etc. The most valuable commodity in America until the end of the Civil War was the womb of the Black woman. It wasn't anything else, because from Black women came free, not only free labor, but a source of empowerment that had nothing to do with money. It had to do with the hierarchical evaluation of whiteness in America. Bottom line. And it permanently set a story. So how do you tell the story of these enslaved people? Well, that goes right on back to Torah, to Judaism, etc. I read this beautiful passage in this book I'm reading about Pesach, and it says that that an African American scholar, Christian scholar, said, "Well, Black folks appropriated like the stories of the Hebrew enslaved," and the guy writes, he says, "No, this wasn't appropriation. The whole purpose was to inspire humanity to be free." Says, no, this is what's supposed to have been happening, that people were supposed to see and be influenced by, and you have make this a universal message of human liberation. And as you said, wholeness versus brokenness. So we, as the descendants of these people who are perpetually searching for ways to exist, and who have family who are also our frenemies, our friends, and all the other different categories. I mean, the bottom line is, ladies and gentlemen, the white Southerner closest relative is the Black man and Black woman, culturally, historically, and genetically. The person who is Mizrahi, Sephardi, etc., who is living in Israel right now, the closest genetic cousins are the people who they have conflict with right now. Let's just put it that way. I won't go into that. My heart's breaking too. There's so much, there's too much. And of course, as someone who works in this space, I have been, people want me to say, I'll just say this. I just want human dignity and human life. And the other people can handle other business. So that's my main thing. That's my way of staying out of it. I had a deep conversation the other day ago, Jhos, you'd appreciate this, with several of my culinary friends who are Palestinian. And they said some very similar things, even though for them, this is a different situation. So we have this, so there's this thing about like wanting this food, right? And so we were joking, and it's true that of all the cultures I've ever grown up around and been around, existed with, there's only two cultures that sit at the table while they're eating and complain and also talk about the food they were having while they're eating the food they're currently having. And that's Black folks and Jewish folks. It's like clockwork. Pesach, Sunday dinner, Shabbat dinner, Karamu at Kwanzaa, it's the same thing. Remember that time we had blah, 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 blah. I wish that, then they talk about what they're gonna have. They never focus on what's in front of them, which is, a difficulty. And then of course, we have this other lovely thing, Jhos, where we say things like this. Only Blacks and Jews do this. So if something's horrifying, it does taste awful. It's happened exactly today. It's like this. You got to eat this. It's terrible. Why do we want to eat that if it's terrible? My mother, blessed memory, used to go, "Oh, this is so nasty. You got to have some." I'm like, why do I have to eat my oppression? Why can we just divorce ourselves from bad flavors and oppressive things on our tongues? Can we just leave that behind? And then there's a part of us that actually says no. We actually do have to understand through our senses what is bad and what is good to really be able to separate those two things apart. When I initially pitched the cooking gene, one thing I came up against over and over again was people's resistance to me being a border crosser. And I say, just like the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh talks about not oppressing the orphan and the widow, etc. This country has a huge problem with the border crosser, the outlier, the forgotten, and the marginalized, because people don't fit into certain boxes. And I guess being told in a gentle way that I don't, what's the phrase? You're not an off-the-shelf type. Okay, cool. And so one publisher was like, big publisher in New York was like, "Oh, this is great, but what about this? What about Jewish stuff?" And I thought this was a curious question. I answered it very proudly, only to find out that what they were really doing was vetting against that and saying to me, not basically, excuse me, I'm lying. They literally said, "Don't wear kippah. Don't talk about being Jewish." By that time, I was already kosher soul on social media. It was not a new thing. And I, I balked. I was just like, okay, what's this about? And the person on the phone who was the gatekeeping editor, who has since, thank God, moved on to other things, said the words, "America's not ready for you." And they're emphasizing Jewish and gay. I'm like, okay. And I immediately said one thing first is, sweetheart, when your people came to America, I was waiting for you in America. That's the first thing. You get to tell me what America is. I've known what America is since 1526, since 1513, since 1545, since 1619. Please don't tell me about America. Just because you showed up at Ellis Island doesn't mean jack, because we built Ellis Island. That's number one. Number two is, this is the only country where I'm possible. And that is the good and for ill part. I'm not, my sisters and brothers be like, okay, thinking that I'm quoting American exceptionalism. I'm not. I am simply saying that a Black gay Jewish man ain't gonna flourish in northern Nigeria. I'm gonna take my chances. This place may have be problematic, and it is, but this time in this moment, this is where I can flourish and be. And if you don't let me flourish and be, that means somebody who is not like me, but is equally a border crosser, marginalized, forgotten, and oppressed, will not be able to have representation, will not feel comfortable telling their own story. And that to me was the most driving factor behind everything that I do. Is I want people who are different, who have always been a thing. And in this country, and in many places like it, in this time in space in human history, we have a lot of people like that. I want every single one of them to tell their narrative, because if they don't, that's where history repeats itself. When we don't know all the pieces, when we don't know all the stories, and when we don't listen to each other.
So true. So true. And when you were talking just now, I was thinking about what you were saying about, like, I'm just going to use these words, the celebrity chef syndrome, right? Well, we invented the celebrity chef. That was called a Kohen back in the day. It was called a priest, because that's what they did. They got up and they made a big show of, not, and talk about, like, tail to snout, right? Like, they literally had the beast up there and slaughtered it and butchered it and cooked it and fed everybody with it. And that was the connection to God. Boom. But it was elite, just as it is today. It was elite, and it completely overlooked the mamas and the grandmas who were tending the pots in the desert and up in the mountains and doing all of that stuff. But we've got the template of the priest, kind of serving in that grand way around food. And then we've got the prophet, who is telling the stories. And, I don't know how you managed it, Holy Brother, but you got one foot on each edge of those realities, because you know what it is to make the food a connection to self, to story. I'm going to go ahead and say it, and to God, and to the greater, to whatever you think of that, the greater story. Just what you just were able to say is like, you can hold it. And that's the teaching I think that we all desperately need right now, because we live in such a broken and fractured world. It's so full of contradictions and paradoxes, and we love people we hate, and we hate people we love, and right? And what we need to, I was listening to one of my old teachers the other day giving a teaching about Bereshit, and in the beginning, the human being is created, and it says, God says, let us create the human being in our image. But who's he talking to, or she talking to, or they talking to? Who are they talking to? Who's the us? Well, it's all of the rest of creation. According to the Midrash, according to the later rabbis, it's like, it was all of them. It was like the bird and the stone and the grass and the mountain and the wind and the water, and they all came together and said, okay, I'll contribute this, I'll contribute this. So we're shmergegi, we're a mess. We are created confused. We are created with all of these parts pulling at us in every which way. The bird is pulling over here. The worm is pulling us down to the ground. We got the bird trying to fly and the worm trying to burrow. and we're trying to make sense of ourselves through that.
Mm.
And I mean, as reading your book, oh, here, now you can see it because I got rid of my backdrop. There it is. Y'all need to read this book because it's beautiful. It's Torah. It really is. It's Torah. And by the way, if anybody has any questions or comments, please throw them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. Anyway, you've done that. You are doing that. That's what you're doing. Like, yeah, you've got some cool recipes, and yeah, you could be on a cooking show, and yeah, you could go and put on your garb and give us a sense of what that. But what you're really doing is bringing all of these wild. You're bringing the worm and the bird together.
Yeah,
Right?
well, the bird has to eat, so I guess the worm and the bird have to go together.
I didn't intend that. I did not
right?
intend that.
I know what you meant though. It's heaven and earth, it's life and death, all those things. But for me, you know how in like every year when you watch a Christmas, what is the book? But I have such Rona brain, Joe. The one with Ebenezer Scrooge. You know that one.
Yeah, Christmas Carol.
Christmas Carol. Thank you. What's called Christmas Story. That's a whole different thing. Fragile. So
I know that. I know that very well because my beloved junior high English teacher is a Dickens freak, and she happens to be here. She's here with us. Yeah, because she's the best. Hey, Miss Khan.
What mazel? There's this whole thing about the Christmas spirit all year round, which is complete nonsense because I ain't never seen it. But I have the Pesach spirit all year round. So for me, that getting out of the narrow place, getting out of that brokenness, getting out of enslavement, acknowledging enslavement, other oppressions, and what that does to you, that's what I do. And so I find it's very frustrating for me sometimes. Some of my biggest critics look like me, and they think that I'm not progressive. They think that I'm not sane, that I ain't woke. I'm like, first of all, kids, I'm not woke, I'm rooted. I had the grandmother who actually lived through Jim Crow. I had the great grandmama who lived through it too. So when y'all talking nuts to me about what you found out on TikTok and Google Books and in Facebook and whatnot, I had the 4 grandparents to tell me how it actually was, and how y'all probably would not be able to survive it. So that's the first thing we need to acknowledge. So I have I acknowledge it's a really weird space. I can say, I want people to understand that. Having a conversation with other Black folks, other Jews, and other gay folk is the most frustrating thing ever. I remember when I start Kosher Soul by talking about meeting this fellow on a bus on the way to shul, and he was doing his granola thing, and I was doing my, tevye with a tan thing, and I was on the way to shul, and next thing I know, he's like, we had a very cordial conversation, and this conversation was very important to me because he said to me, "So do you like being Jewish?" And I said, I gave some, Hillel meet Shammai answer. And then he looked at me and he said, okay, but you know what? You're not really Jewish until you cannot stand other Jews, but you have to be around them because they're your people and you have to love them anyway. And I completely understood what he meant, and I didn't take offense to it because I felt exactly that way about other LGBT people and other Black folks. I knew exactly what he meant. When your mishpacha is your mishpacha, even when they get on your last damn nerve, they're your mishpacha. And that is something that we have to really grapple with, and we wrestle with each other more than we wrestle with God. And so all of that comes into who I am, and in food, in terms of the kitchen and cooking and all of that. Like, I have an Afro-Ashkenazi kitchen. All the different worlds are there. And I think people need to understand, as I'm writing now and figuring this out now, when you are in diaspora, and especially when you represent, just like in the same way that the original sins, plural, of the United States is Native American removal and African enslavement, the original sins of the Western world is anti-Semitism first, and then followed many years later by anti-Blackness. So when you are in diaspora and you have those similar legacies, right? When you go into the kitchen, you're going with the entire globe, because everywhere that the Jewish diaspora was, the African diaspora was. So you really don't believe that and then that marginalization, these two people never lived together, slept together, had children, created culture together in all that time. And so one of the hardest parts about writing about the existence of Jews who are Black, that to use our modern terms, is that there is all this buried history. If you don't mind, I'd like to tell people like a minute and a half about that. Because so there's a book that this scholar recently wrote. She did a beautiful job. It's called Once We Were Slaves. And it's about this young woman who is born enslaved in Barbados, for lack of a better term, mixed ancestry. She is emancipated by her father, her former slaveholder, and she is sent to live in New York, and she becomes the matriarch of all of these established Jewish families, half Black woman. You know, you don't hear about things like that. All you hear about is jokes about Sammy Davis Jr. and some other nonsense. And maybe Lenny Kravitz. I'm like, girl, Lenny Kravitz's boo was a Jewish girl too. Lisa Bonet. Eric Andre is Jewish, and Nell Carter was Jewish. But wait a minute. There was a Black synagogue in Suriname, and there were Black Jews in the synagogues in Amsterdam and in London and in Italy back in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. There were Black people at the Seder in Spain. There were Black Palestinians in the Middle Ages when the Crusades happened. And guess what? On the other side, there were Black Jews living there too. And if anybody asked you or cared to ask, you know, Moshe Rabbeinu looked a hell of a lot more like me and a lot less like Ben Shapiro. Take that, Ben.
Yes, sir. That's right.
Look that up next to WAP.
Yeah, so, and guess what? And he wasn't wearing a Striemel either.
And he wasn't wearing
no Striemel.
No Keeper Struga, and he wasn't eating kugel. So, I mean, all those different pieces. But also, you know, when I was in the last place I was before the pandemic was a place in Senegal called Sali Portudal. And the reason Portudal is Portugal. You know who came to Sali Portudal? Jews who were escaping the Inquisition. To this day, the people there, I saw this with my own two eyes. The people there, when they leave a building, touch the doorposts of the building. And I didn't say a word. I just was like, okay, this is interesting. This is a predominantly Muslim population. And yet there are all these little things going on. I'm like, and no one knows. And so that made me feel like this is something that we rarely talk about, is the fact that we are not antipodal. You know, in America, they like to make the joke that the whitest of the white is the Jew and the blackest of the black is us. The only issue is that Jews in America have never allowed to be anything but off-white, if they did present as white. And then the bottom line behind all that is that when you talk about Jewish, it's a history of a global people, in a sense of the same being African. It's a history of a global people, and the food reflects that. You know, my food is not unusual in the sense of these collisions have been happening for millennia, and the fact of the matter is, in this culture, in this society, which unfortunately some people mitigate against diversity, it's like we can't help but be happily contaminated as Americans. In fact, the biggest blessing that we have is that we have no excuse to not know our neighbor and be part of a global culture, because that's what we are, whether some people like it or not. And if they want to give up all of the blessings of being a multicultural society, they can have Lawrence Welk polka music and mayonnaise. I'm okay with that. I'll happily take the rest of it and, you know, keep them in their zoo. But the bottom line is that we, when it comes to food, there's so many stories. Like, for example, Black folks who went to the North and Midwest and West during the Great Migration became avid consumers of deli food, okay? Because it was available, it was there, it was present. And so it wasn't a surprise to them. And also, people forget, Black folks were the domestics in a lot of these upper middle class Jewish households in the North and the South. And so therefore, in the South, it was different, because those were the women in the Ashkenazi households, at least, who created their own unique fusion that they never really took home. It was always in the house. So if you talk to Jews from Savannah, Paul, you might know about this, in Atlanta and Birmingham and Montgomery and other places, in New Orleans and Memphis, you know, when people describe Shabbat dinner, they will always say the following things. They always say there was fried chicken, there was okra soup or gumbo, there was black eyed peas and kishka, there was, like I do, matzo meal, fried chicken, and Pesach. There were biscuits on the table, and not just challah. There were all these things that signified Southern identity, Southern Jewish identity. And it was crazy because one time I went to Savannah and I was at Mikveh Israel, brief drop in during Sukkot. And then I was in Maine 2 weeks later, and I met a woman who still had her accent. She was still some Savannah Jewish. And she told me the exact same menu that she had every Friday night that a gentleman in Savannah told me, and the entire menu was basically Gullah Geechee. It was, oh, we had red rice and rice and black eyed peas, and we had okra soup, and we had fried chicken, and we had biscuits, and we did this and we did that, and we would have butter beans, and we'd have, nothing like someone from New York or from the West Coast might have had the same time. And this was, thousands of Jews had the same exact cultural experience that was extremely Black. Mm-hmm. You're muted.
No, I'm not. Right? Like, we touch each other and we feed each other and we learn from each other, and it's amazing. I'm a musician, and there is a lot of similar stories between the Roma musicians and the Jewish musicians,
Right,
especially in the Transylvania area, because the Jewish musicians wanted to be guests at the Jewish weddings. So most Jewish weddings hired Roma or Sinta bands. And most Roma weddings hired Jewish bands. So they learned each other's music and celebrated with each other, and say, okay, we'll you go dance, we'll play the tunes. Like, this is where those kind of like touchstone rituals, touchstone celebrations, milestones in our lives, we not only can be there for each other, but we can actually put our flavors in each other's mouths, our tunes in each other's ears, like that. And I was thinking about that, the brilliance of the early rabbis of recognizing that that's how we're going to tell these stories. We're not just going to tell these stories because some people, that's not their way. They're never going to get it. You can tell them and describe it, and it's going to go whoosh. The Torah says, tell the story. That's all it tells us. The rabbis invent the Seder, in which they brilliantly make part of the story, taste it. And just what you were saying earlier, like, of course we say tuh, because we're supposed to say tuh to that.
Right,
we're supposed to say tuh to anything that isn't like completely deliciously perfect and holds, the other piece of it is like that nostalgia piece, right? Nostos, like away from home, algia, like a longing for that faraway home that doesn't really exist and never did, because that's how we hold it. We can't go back. We can only go forward. But when the past is influencing us, the best we can do is bring a little zetz, right? A little patch, a little something that embodies it. So eat the bitter herbs. Taste the sweet spring vegetable. Put the salt in your mouth. Feel the sweat, the tears, the bitterness, the burn, all of it. Like, feel it in a way that is tangible. And now we can talk.
Right.
And I know, I think you said this in the book or in one of your conversations with somebody. You quoted a friend of yours, an Orthodox woman, who said, Michael, you're living the Haggadah, right? Like, it's not just Pesach for you. You have chosen to walk through life every day, tasting a little of the bitterness, a little of the sweetness, a little of the sweat, a little of the tears, a little of the the savory wholeness of the whole thing. So that's so inspiring. So anyway, I made a drink for you. I made a cocktail that's based on what I've learned about you, and so it's a julep. So we've got like that part of the South, that kind of, where you have talked about, you've got all flavors running through your veins. So this is that, like, imagine that country porch, hot day, kickback. We got the nice mint. So then I had to stick a strawberry in there, because strawberries are like the gayest fruit ever, right? Like, what other fruit puts the seeds on the outside? That's crazy, but there it
There you go.
is. Seeds on the outside. That is so queer. It's the queerest fruit I could think of. So I put that, and that's muddled in there with molasses. So sweet and bitter, and we can't get around the story of sugar and the
Right.
role that sugar played in the magnification of the slave trade, of the hideous triangle, the trade triangle, and sugar is a nightmarish part of it, and we love it. Like,
And
oh,
it's also like the dividing line between Litvaks and Galicianos, right?
sugar, yeah.
Right? It's like sugar becomes cheaper because it's grown by the enslaved. And then when those places in Europe start to lose those colonies, then the sugar beet becomes a thing. And this whole sugar and gefilte fish thing is it's rooted. It's a connected history. And it's really weird because to tell people things like, oh, so and so comes from a mixed marriage. Why are they a mixed marriage? They're both Jewish. Well, one comes from Lithuania, one comes from Poland. And just understanding that, but also just telling these stories to folks of color who may not be familiar with these narratives is interesting because the culture convinces you that you're on the other side of the world, that somehow people aren't connected. If people understood the deep ways that we were connected, I think we'd be better off. But like, thank you for the julep. I
Well, wait,
appreciate
I'm
it.
not done. So
What? You're
no,
not
I'm not.
done yet?
I'm almost done. So then
What else
it's
is in
that.
it?
Now I know it's close. So I make very complicated drinks. So then I
Oh,
muddled. I muddled the strawberry and the bittersweet molasses, and then I muddled some more mint and a handful of dill, because we have got to get
hey
the
man,
deli. We
ill.
got to
Okay.
get deli in there, man. You got to get deli in there. So I got a handful of dill, and then I topped it with bourbon, IW Harper bourbon, which the IW actually stands for Isaac Wolf, and Harper was a made up name. It should have been IW Bernheim, but IW Bernheim in the late 19th century didn't think that was going to sell. So Kentucky, is the heart of bourbon. Bourbon is
Right.
the American spirit. These Jews, many Jews, came to that area wanting to do something quintessentially American, wanting to, like, own a taste of America. And 3% of Kentucky's population was Jewish, but 25% of the distilleries were owned and run by Jews. So we had to
We're
get
from
that in there.
Germany, a place where people distill and
Most,
make
that's right,
brew.
right, and some
Mhm.
from Lithuania too, because of that's a whole other
A
drosh.
little
We
bit,
need to,
a
we
little
need to
bit.
do another one on that. But so
Absolutely.
anyway, I did my very best to get as much of your teaching into a glass as I could. So I wanted to raise a l'chaim to you, and
Oh, yes. Hold it up so I can see the color one more time. Just real quick, Joss. Very nice, very nice. I'm not sure about that deal, but
it's
hurting.
good.
I'll
All
give
right,
you.
you try it. It's
All
good.
right, I'll give you no thank you drink. This culture is good.
So that kind of brings me to talking a little bit about. I mean, and this is kind of a curveball in the book, because you went to Ireland too, because
Hmm.
that's part of your story too. And what's so interesting about Ireland is another oppressed people who rejected food, right? Like,
Hmm.
there's a beautiful book by Hasia Diner about three cultures. So Italians, Jews, and Irish, large immigrant populations in the United States, whose food pathways are so different. I mean, Jews and Italians are big on food, but like you said, Jews have got a tortured relationship with it, and it's got to be a little bad to be good. All right. Italians are like, bring it on. And Irish are like, excuse my French, food.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know, we're not doing food. When's the last time y'all went to a high end Irish restaurant? Have you ever seen an Irish restaurant? ever in your life, right?
Absolutely.
They don't exist because there was a complete rejection of the harm and the pain and the suffering around food. But
And corned beef does
alcohol,
not count. They got that from us.
that's, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'd love to hear, your take on that kind of other part of yourself too, of coming through that island. Of course, you go to Ireland, and especially nowadays, the food's fantastic. It's off
Right.
the hook. It's delicious. I was there in the 1980s, and there were three things you could eat: tea, bread, and soup. That was it.
And
There was
and
not
and and chips on a good day.
bad chips on a good day.
Bad chips on a good day. I mean, the bottom line for me is that, I feel like the connection between myself and the other parts of my identity and genetic heritage. I know that for a lot of people, when they get uncomfortable with that conversation, they're trying to shut it down. And it's like, for those of us who have been exiled from firm identities, that's not a thing we can do. It's not a thing we can do. One guy, he tried me really good back in the day, right when I was finishing the cooking gene and everything, and he didn't like me because I was challenging the idea of chefs appropriating the food and the legacy, everything, and having advantages that Black culinarians did not. He was trying to say that my point was moot, that we're all related. I'm like, okay, person, your folks were in Europe marrying your cousins for 30 generations. My people were brought from every part of Africa and every part of Europe and Native America, and even beyond that, East Asia and the Middle East. And so I don't know. I don't have your story, like at all. Like at all. That's not who I am. But also, you're not going to take away from us the conversation of what it means to go to other parts of ourselves. So one thing that I was really am was and are confused by when it comes to the way that Western Jews organize their identity is the idea that was the bubble principle. The teaching children, teaching ourselves, okay, well, Jews lived in these bubbles and never left their bubble, and they were just Jews. Okay, that's cool. So how come you and the Hungarians have and the Poles and Ukrainians have the same stuffed cabbage? Only yours is kosher. So you gonna tell me they just saw the stuffed cabbage and was like, I can replicate that? Somebody was eating that stuffed cabbage, Chazer and all. Oh, you mean to tell me that people all of a sudden end up with blue eyes and red hair and green eyes and brown hair in the middle of Belarus and Latvia and okay, that's like me saying I'm just lighter because I was in America. That's nonsense. Somebody slept with somebody, so cut it out. And also, we keep forgetting that even though genetics shows us that there is pretty much a strong tree trunk for Ashkenazi Jews, Mizrahi Jews, Sephardi Jews. So in other words, it's a coherent genetic community. It's not Khazars, it's not some other false nonsense. But we also have to remember something else. Those were times and places where children were often abandoned. Some people could not have children. And those were the days and times where there was no ID, there was no Amber Alert. And this is the reason why you could convert a baby, convert a child. So you mean to tell me those people never entered the genetic stream of the people? And so I would have these conversations when I was a Hebrew school teacher with my sixth graders, and we talked about Jews around the world and communities. And I asked them one time, point blank, I said, why do you think I look the way I look? And I said, I have all this hair on my arms. I have this big, full, not quite curly, not quite straight beard, which is not typical for a West African. And I said, my skin is a certain color. And this is what my grandma looked like. And everybody, and they were dumbfounded because they had never thought to ask the question, how come people can be part of one group but look different? They didn't understand that. And then one of my girls, she said, people always tell me that I look Irish, but both of my parents are Jewish from Eastern Europe, European heritage, and this is just how I look. And I was very sympathetic because I was just like, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I said, but but you have to acknowledge how different you are. But for the majority of kids in this room, they've never had to think about what would it be like if I didn't look like my parents? What would it be like if I looked like my grandparents? What would it be like if I didn't talk like them, walk like them? One of the last things I said as I left one particular Hebrew school was the biggest issue with this generation is they've never known anybody with the accent. And by the accent, I mean the accent of an immigrant, someone who had to turn their back on everything they knew, leave behind everyone they knew, come to America, give it all up for the sake of their children and their grandchildren, Lador Vador. And when you don't have those kind of conversations with people who wore the shoe, it's a lot harder to identify and have a sense of group commitment and clarity about your blessings and the curses you left behind, the curses you deal with, and the blessings that you left behind, the blessings that you have because your ancestor made certain choices. So for me, confronting the European side is, I think people think that we Black folks as a community, curse all of it. But people who are rooted like myself understand there is a big difference between the people who did the enslaving, did the violations here, and the people who were in Europe who did not have the same concept of race as their American descendants. So for me to go to Ireland and talk about how I'm part Irish, not one Irish person ever went, oh, they were perfectly clear in the fact that their people went everywhere and did a little bit of everything, and that was it. But you try to talk that nonsense in Boston, talk about Black folks of Irish heritage walking the St. Patrick's Day parade. And I would dare to say, when I meet English people, I'll tell them the same thing. They kind of laugh it off, and I won't let them laugh it off. I'm like, you have far more Black relatives in the New World than you do white ones. And you know why? Why you do in the Caribbean and in the American South and in New England and in the middle colonies and everywhere else. You have cousins. And it's the same thing, Jhos. I mean, I'm really passionate about this because and I'm not about the ancestry life where it's like I used to wear a kilt, but now I wear a dirndl. I mean, like okay, girl, that's cute. Try a camisole. Do whatever you need to do. But the bottom line is, it's not about what you wear. It's about who you are and how you think that counts. The fact that we have all these people in Texas going, oh, I don't like them immigrants. But guess what? If you are a white Texan and your roots go back to like the beginning of Texas, the chances are that you have a Mexican, Native, or Black ancestor go way the hell up to the point where it's like 20 or 30 years. It's just like the same thing in Spain and Portugal. Jewish ancestry, what is like 30% for Spaniards and 50 to 60% for Portuguese? Who are we hating? We're hating ourselves. We're hating our cousins. We're hating our family. And, we have the opportunity to when we sit down to eat, I don't believe in kumbaya. I believe in actually, okay, you eat the food, but you understand the stories and you understand how it got to your plate. You know what I'm saying? And you have to talk about the lives of the people and call the names out of the cooks and the chefs that came before and the homemakers that came before, and the providers and the butchers and the barbecue men and the nutritionists and agronomists and sommeliers. You call them out now and then, because we need to understand the journeys people take. That's why I wrote the book the way I did. Anybody can write a cookbook, and it will end up, and I promise you, it will end up in a bargain bin somewhere. No matter how famous you are, or a second or third hand bookstore. But not everybody can write the story of thousands of families. On a last note on that one, I have several famous cousins. Oh crap! I didn't think about this. Liz Cheney is my cousin, right? This whole time been like, I don't care about her. It's too bad. You did what you did. She's my daggone cousin. So was Sarah Palin. But okay, so you know what wipes out all of those people? Samuel L. Jackson is also my cousin. So that just totally obliterates it and just scratches it out. So, we're back on track. Snakes on the plane.
Michael, I love you. Thank you so much for being exactly who you are, and I just wanna bless you. Yivarachacha Yavi Yishmerecha. May God bless you and keep you safe.
Thank you.
And may all the light that shines upon you fill you up and keep shining back on through you.
Oh man, I just want to say one quick thing before we go, and that is this. Ladies and gentlemen, my rabbi taught me one of the most valuable teachings I've ever heard. And because we're still not out of the waters yet, I want to pass it on to you before we go. And that it goes like this. Everything that happens to us occurs for the sake of someone else. And everything that happens to others occurs for our sake. We are an interdependent species. We have to remember that it's because we were made that way. We were made, de vibus mit devote, life is with people, that we have to help each other and help each other survive, love, and keep going. So thank you, Jhos, so much. I feel like I'm talking to someone who I talked a lot with before we entered this earthly plane. And thank you, Stephanie, for being so patient, and just thank you, Steve, and everybody else who's been a part of this, Paul, everybody who's Melissa, for having me, because it's so important that, I can do all these things, but being seen and being shown and being welcomed and being expanded, and not just tolerated, is a human gift. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Anytime, my friend, anytime. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody for being the kind of community that it can hold truth, that can hold a place where people can show up and to teach and to tell and to explore and to just expand. It's a lot. It's a lot. Most of our country right now is pulling into tighter little more uniform echo chambers and boxes, and to be here and just let it ring is just a blessing. Thank you so much. I want to bring Steve on for a minute and close us out with a few words.
Great. Thank you, Jhos. Thank you, Michael. Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Sloan. I'm a member of the JCC of San Francisco Board of Directors, and we're really happy that you're all able to be with us tonight. And Michael and Jhos, that was a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. I wanted to quickly thank all of our supporters, our sponsors, our host committee members, and especially the JCCSF staff who worked really hard to put this event together. And a special shout out to our event co-chairs, Randy and Bob Fields, Craig McGahee and Wendy Robbins, and Nellie and Kevin Perkins, and also our amazing board of directors, 100% of whom participated in the challenge grant that you may have seen today in the various emails that went out. And that was a key component to our fundraising activities. And I'm pleased to say that we are approaching the $300,000 mark in our fundraising for today, which is a fantastic number. So thank you to everyone that helped make that happen. While this event was really important in terms of fundraising for the JCCSF, staff and lay leadership of the organization, we felt very strongly that we had a unique opportunity here, and quite frankly, a responsibility to support the broader community, especially during what's been a really tough time. And after a lot of discussion and consideration, we made the decision to help address food insecurity by making a donation to our good friends at Glide. The amount that we're donating will support the delivery of close to 1,000 meals for community members in need. And I'm really happy that joining us tonight from Glide is our good friend, Rabbi Michael Lezak, who's on staff at Glide at the Center for Social Justice. And Rabbi Michael's got a few short words for us tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to him now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Steve. Thanks so much to Jhos and Michael for the mighty Torah you shared with us tonight and the flavors that I think we're all tasting over this Zoom screen. Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Lezak. I'm a rabbi. I work at Glide. If you don't know Glide, it is both a historically Black church and a justice juggernaut in the Tenderloin here in San Francisco. We feed close to 1 million meals a year and pass out a bunch of needles to people who are wrestling with addiction, and think about how we shape racial justice. About 3 months before I started at Glide, which was over 4 years ago, I came to the JCC in San Francisco to hear Brian Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, speak. Like every time I hear Brian, I think he's one of the great lights in America. He points us to, I think, the way we need to be in the world. He talks really about 4 main points: about the need for proximity, about the push to have us imagine new narratives of dropping a rabbi in at a church or thinking about redemptive visions for our cities and our country, to hold on to hope with everything we've got. And the last one is to do uncomfortable things. And regularly leaving my neighborhood and walking into the Tenderloin is a deeply uncomfortable experience. And I want to invite you all into Glide to come serve meals. We bake challah every Friday in the Glide kitchen. I got asked, Michael, just for your food trivia, I got asked a question I think that has never been asked in all of Jewish history. About 3 Christmases ago, the head of the Glide kitchen came to me and said, "Hey, Rabbi, the House of Prime Rib donates 2,500 pounds of prime rib for Glide clients on Christmas. Do you think you guys could bake 2,500 challahs for Christmas this year?" So yes, we've been doing it every Christmas, turning out some warm Jewish Sabbath bread for hungry folks. And we just feel really deeply grateful to all of you at the JCC for your generosity and for your support. And I'll just close with this image. I'm thinking both about the pain that we're witnessing in Israel and Palestine tonight, and the pain that we see daily on our streets. I'm thinking of Psalm 147, verse 3, that calls God the healer of shattered hearts and the binder of wounds. And I think for those of us on the screen, all created in the image of God, we are here to heal wounds and to bind up wounds. And I think the best way we do that is when we're in it together. So thinking so much about you at the JCC who are coming together to Glide, looking forward to deepening this work in the coming months and years. I'll turn it back to you, Steve. Hope you all have a beautiful night.
Great. Thank you, Rabbi Michael. And now we're going to go back to Jhos to close us out for the evening. Thank you.
Well, it's cliche, but what can I say that hasn't already been said? It's this is why I love working for the JCC. I love that we've got action happening, we've got thought happening, we've got people showing up even when it's hard to show up, and connection. So I just, want to bless us all to remember, celebrate, grieve, dance, fight, struggle together. It's so much better than doing it all by yourself. So thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much to Stephanie and to our whole staff. Dre is back there someplace. Paul, welcome aboard, my friend. This is it. This is your first big event with us. This is amazing. To Janine, and I mean, there's so many people. Gail, who constantly coming up with new ideas of how to push the boundaries of what we do into the community. Hillary, who watches over our youth program and makes sure that our kids are getting rooted in. Yeah, look, you're getting a lot of snaps, my friend, of getting our kids on board with living lives of social justice. It could go on and on and on. Jim, for making sure that all the numbers manage to come out at least as close to even as possible so that we can keep going on. David, who is just the most subversive thinker I think I've ever met in my life, and so remains open to wild ideas that sometimes make manifest and take us to the edge, the cutting edge of Jewish education here in the Bay. It goes on and on and on. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing team. And thanks to all of you who have been so generous with your time, with your resources, with your love, with your ideas, to make sure that this operation keeps going and has made us, allowed us to get through this terrible pandemic. Blessings to everybody. I look forward to more of this. Michael, we got to take this on the road. This was way fun. I want you to come preach at my shul. Yeah, would you do it? Would you give a drosh? Because I will track you down and say, please, we've got, yeah, you're in? Okay, amen. We got it. All right, everybody. All blessings to everybody. Thank you so much.